Hey everyone, welcome back to Vera Reads Books. In today's video, we're going to be talking about all the books that I've read so far this year. At the time of me filming this, it is still July. I think this video will probably go up somewhere in August, but we have 24 books to talk about today. There is a mix of genres. There's some literary fiction, fantasy, sci-fi, murder mystery, crime, detective, thriller type books. There is a non-fiction book. So we're gonna go over the books in the order that I read them. I'm going to give you my spoiler-free overview, what they are about, what my thoughts about them were, and if I would recommend reading them, yes or no. I'll make sure to include video chapters as well, so feel free to use them if you want to skip around. Of course, as always, feel free to join me, grab yourself something nice to drink too. I have some nice tea here, and let's talk about it. Alright, the first book that I read this year was Snow Country by Yasunari Kawabata. And this was in January, the middle of winter, where there was a thick layer of snow here in the Netherlands, which was really cool because this book also takes place in a snowy landscape. Yasunari Kawabata is a very famous Japanese author. He was the first Japanese author to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, and this is probably his most famous work. It was written around the 1930s, 1940s. So Snow Country is considered a classic in Japanese literature. It is highly studied and analyzed, and it is praised for its elegance and beautiful prose. Yasunari Kawabata was all about capturing the beauty in fleeting moments. This book is not very plot heavy. Actually, not much happens at all. And I have to also say that while I did enjoy this book overall, I think that a large part of it kind of went over my head, to be perfectly honest, just because I'm not someone who knows that much about Japanese classic literature, and because no one ever says anything directly in this book. It is all indirect communication. There's a lot of subtext, it's mostly about what's not being said. I'm from the Netherlands. We are very direct here. So I do think that, there was a lot about this book that you can probably study and talk about that kind of went over my head a little bit. The story follows a wealthy man called Shimamura. He lives in Tokyo with his family, but a couple times a year he just takes off to the mountains, Snow Country, which is the part of Japan that is covered in snow in the wintertime, to visit a hot spring. And that is where a geisha works called Komako. And Shimamura and Komako get in this kind of push and pull, non-defined relationship. I really enjoyed the distinction between someone like Shimamura, who is wealthy. He never had to work for his money. He inherited it. He's free to just leave his family whenever he wants to go gallivanting off in the mountains, versus Komako, who is a geisha who basically sold herself for a few years to work under this contract as a geisha, who is the opposite of free. And it took me a while to get into this book just because Shimamura was not a very interesting character for me. He wasn't very likable either, and I really enjoyed the character of Komako a lot more, so I would have preferred it if this book was written from her point of view rather than Shimamura's point of view. I think that would have made the book a lot more interesting for me. Komako was a very interesting character, though. She got more and more kind of reckless as the book went on, and the prose was very beautiful. The scenery, the snow, the stillness, it was definitely an experience to read. Obviously, you do have to place this book in the place and time that it was written. Shimamura has some strange, for me, views on life, on women. Yeah, it wasn't very easy to read always. But if you like literary classics, beautiful prose, vivid imagery, and just a lot of subtext and room to leave things up to interpretation, then you might really enjoy this. And if you're the type of person who likes to read wintry books in the winter, then this is one that I would recommend. Next up, I read Silent Parade by Keigo Higashino. This is a crime detective novel, and Keigo Higashino has two big series, the Detective Galileo series and the Detective Kaga series. And from both of these series, I've read several of his books. This one was from the Detective Galileo series. This book follows Detective Kusanagi, who gets put on a case of a missing teenage girl. She went missing 3 years ago, and her remains were now found in a burned down house. The reason that he is put on this case is because the suspect is someone that Kusanagi remembers from a previous case that he worked on many years ago. Kusanagi remembers this suspect because he was also on trial many years ago for the murder of a child back then, and he got away with it due to lack of evidence and also kind of using this loophole in the law. And obviously this has also really been a very frustrating thing for Kusanagi, who now feels like he has another chance to get this man. But as it turns out, the suspect is then found dead himself. So we have this huge cast of characters in the book, both of the people, of the young child that he allegedly murdered back then, and now also the teenage girl that went missing, who all have motive, but they also all have an alibi. I really enjoyed this book. It has lots of surprise twists and turns and reveals along the way. Following the clues, putting them all together was a lot of fun. And these books are not very character driven. They are not very atmospheric and brooding like some of the more other kinds of detective books that I typically read. It is much faster. You don't really get that much into the head of, for example, Kusanagi, but as a crime detective thriller type book, this was very entertaining. So if you're into this kind of book, then this is one that I would recommend. When it comes to Keigo Higashino's work, what you can do is just look up all the books in the Detective Galileo series and the Detective Kaga series and read them in order. But basically, I think you can also just pick one book that sparks your interest and read that. There's no real need to read all of these in order, in my opinion. Next up, I read 2 books in a trilogy. The first book in this trilogy I read back in 2025, and the second and third book I read this year. It was the Drowning Empire trilogy by Andrea Stewart, and books 2 and 3 are called The Bone Shard Emperor and The Bone Shard War. This was a super fun fantasy series for me to read, so let me see if I can quickly summarize what it's about. There is this empire. It consists of many different islands, and it is ruled by a not very likable emperor who uses bone shard magic to keep the people in line. And what bone shard magic is that he takes a shard of bone from his people that is located underneath their skull. As soon as kids turn 8, once a year, there is a festival where they have to go to get their bone shard removed. This is a very dangerous thing. Sometimes kids die, sometimes people get sick later in life. So obviously people are not happy about this. And then the emperor uses those bone shards to create constructs. And constructs are basically all kinds of animal parts sewn together with magic. And because they have these shards in them that have commands written on them with the bone shard magic that the emperor does, they follow his rule and they follow their programming. So these constructs help him to keep order in the empire. And they go from fairly basic constructs that can do basic tasks all the way up to highly intelligent constructs who are also the emperor's advisor. This is an adult epic fantasy series with also touches of sci-fi and slight horror touches as well. I had an amazing time with this series. The world building was super cool. The characters were super cool. It is a multiple POV fantasy story, which I already usually very much like. There are 5 characters whose point of view you skip in between, and 2 of them are more so the main characters, I would say. One of them is Lynn. She is the emperor's daughter. And the other one is Jovis, who is a smuggler who is trying to find his missing wife. And this series has some amazing magical animal companions. If you enjoy magical animal companions, then I think that you would really like this series. One of them just completely stole my heart, and I felt like, I don't know, I would do anything for them. I was really invested in their whole thing with this book. If you enjoy epic fantasy with very rich world building and lore, a fascinating magic system, political intrigue, great characters, magical animal companions, all of that good stuff, then you will really enjoy this series. I will recommend it. Next up, we have A Death in Tokyo, another Keigo Higashino book. While The Silent Parade was part of the Detective Galileo series, this one is part of the Detective Kaga series, and this one I enjoyed 2. In the Nihonbashi district in Tokyo, there is a famous bridge called the Nihonbashi Bridge, and there is a statue of a kirin on that bridge. And a kirin is a Japanese mythical creature. And one evening, a man staggers onto the bridge. He appears to be drunk and he collapses underneath the kirin statue. A policeman, he's on duty, he sees this man, thinking that he's probably passed out drunk, so he goes over to him to find that he is in fact very much dead and stabbed in the chest. They quickly figure out that where he died was not where he was stabbed, so they search around and they find this car accident victim who was in a car accident a little further away, fleeing from the police, and when they search him, they find the wallet of the dead man on the car accident victim. Detective Kaga and his colleagues try to figure out what exactly happened here, and the higher-ups at the police station are very much keen on blaming the car accident victim for the murder since he did have the victim's wallet on him. But Detective Kaga instinctively feels that there might be something more to the case. This one I enjoyed as well, slightly less than Silent Parade, but it was still a very enjoyable read. I also just personally always really like to read books that are set in Tokyo because it reminds me of the time that I spent there and it feels a little bit nostalgic for me and stuff, so that makes these books extra fun for me personally. But if you like fun, interesting, fast-paced murder, mystery, crime, detective novels, then this would also definitely be one that I recommend checking out. The next book I read was The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. This is a literary fiction book. It is rather short and also just wonderful. The book is about a 64-year-old math professor whose memory only lasts for 80 minutes because of an accident that he has been in, and the woman who is his housekeeper who takes care of him, and her 10-year-old son, Ruth. The housekeeper is the main protagonist of the story. She isn't given a name, but at the start of the book, she gets called into the agency office and she gets told that her assignment's going to change and that she is to take care of this 64-year-old math professor with the memory problem, and in his files she can see many stars next to his name, which means that every time someone gets a star, it means that there's a new housekeeper coming. So there have been many switches. She is to help him cook, clean, get groceries, things like that. And obviously, since his memory only lasts 80 minutes, every morning that she comes, he doesn't remember her. She does remember him, obviously. And this relationship starts to form between her, the professor, and her son, who usually comes over there after school as well. This was the first book from Yoko Ogawa that I read, and I really, really loved it. I remember thinking about maybe 20% into this book, actually getting a little bit scared because I noticed how emotionally invested I was becoming, and I felt like she kind of had my heart hostage. Like, oh, is this going to be a super sad book? It's going to break my heart, but there wasn't anything that I was going to do about it because obviously I was going to finish it because it was such an amazing book. But luckily, it is a beautiful book. It is emotional, it's tender, but it's not soul-crushingly sad. It is just really, really beautiful. It's about the relationships that we form with people and the role of memory in that. I thought the prose was beautiful too, very simple and clean, but there was a lot underneath the surface. I really enjoyed spending time in the main character's head too. It felt like a safe, nice space for me to be. I loved the relationship between the math professor and her son. The math professor too was such a fun character. He was obviously very much into math. There is a lot of math in this book too, because he gives them sometimes math lectures or little math problems to work on, and then he'll explain something. And as someone who is not necessarily very good at math, nor very interested in math, I still really found it very interesting, and this book made me also understand a little bit more what it is that some people just really enjoy about math, the beauty, the poetry of it, the unchanging truth. It was super, super interesting, and also just, as I said, the relationship between those three people. It was a beautiful book that I cannot recommend enough. I think everyone will enjoy this. And then I read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I actually have a full in-depth spoiler-free and spoiler review of both the book and the movie already out, so I will link that down below for anyone who's interested in hearing my thoughts. Overall, to quickly summarize, I have mixed feelings about this book. I did not enjoy the writing. I did very much enjoy the story. So if you want to hear more, then I recommend watching that video. And if you haven't read this book or seen the movie with Ryan Gosling yet, then I can say that this is a book about a man who wakes up from a coma with no memory, no recollection of who he is, where he is, how he got there. He doesn't know anything. And then during the book, he starts to recover parts of his memory and also kind of like use science and the things he has around him to figure out like, where am I, what's going on? And he figures out that he is in deep space in a spaceship and he's all alone because he has 2 crew members with him, but they are both dead. They didn't survive the coma. So he needs to figure out like, why am I here? What is my mission? And it turns out that this is actually a very important mission because there is something going on in space that is causing the sun to dim and the earth to cool down. And if something doesn't change, then everyone on earth is going to die. The book follows 2 timelines. So like the current timeline that I just mentioned, and then also his memories starting to return to him. So there is a past that kind of goes from him learning about this problem with the sun to then figuring out like, how did he eventually get up on the spaceship, because he isn't an astronaut, he is a scientist. So yeah, that was all very much fun. I did not enjoy the writing. Go watch that video if you want to hear more. Next up, I picked up The Will of the Many by James Islington, and this is the book that I ended up DNFing. Not because it wasn't good or that I didn't like it or anything, but the start of this book was so incredibly dark, so gloomy, so depressing and hopeless that I noticed it had a very strong impact on my mood. And I read a lot of like slightly darker books with darker themes, and I really don't mind if books make me feel things, even unpleasant things. I actually like that sometimes. I don't know what that says about me, but I don't mind books that are darker or something, but this book I noticed that it was impacting my mood even long after I stopped reading for the day. I kept feeling that depressing feeling and I was just like, you know, I'm not in the mood for this in my life right now, so I stopped reading that book. The Will of the Many is the first book in a fantasy trilogy. The second book is out also already. The third book isn't yet. It just wasn't the time in my life for this book, so I put it away. I do really want to try reading it someday because I hear great things about it, but not right now. So then I picked up something completely different, which was the Shady Hollow series by Juneau Black, which is a murder mystery series. It has 6 novels and 2 short stories. Cozy murder mysteries with woodland creatures. This was recommended to me by a viewer and I had a ton of fun with this series. I have a full in-depth video with my spoiler-free review also already out of Shady Hollow, so I will link that down below. It's cozy, it has beautiful descriptions of nature, cozy foods and drinks, interesting characters, interesting mysteries. If this is something that speaks to you, I highly recommend checking out my more in-depth review video. Next up, I read an amazing fantasy duology, the Talon duology by Jen Williams. The first book is called Talon Sister and the second book is called Titan Child. So I'm not sure about the order of posting. By the time this video goes up, either I will already have posted an in-depth review about the Talon duology, or it will be the video right after this one. So if it's already out, I will link it down below as well, otherwise keep an eye out for it. The Talon duology is epic fantasy with very rich world building, super interesting characters. It is a multiple POV story as well. It has such cool magic and ancient gods and forgotten civilizations and eerie landscapes and beautiful landscapes and interesting systems. In this world there are mythological creatures known as titans. There used to be many more titans alive. Now there are much fewer. The titan bones are what is used to have the magic system in this world that people use to create magic. And the only really like semi-thriving Titan society left is that of the Griffins. At the start of the first book, 2 Griffins find a human baby, and she is abandoned in the woods. There is a dead human somewhere nearby, so they realize this human baby is on her own, and they decide to bring that baby home with them to their nest to raise them alongside their Griffin cub Tiruk. And this is very special because normally Griffins eat humans. They are very territorial. If humans come into Griffin territory, they will not survive. So something in their intuition says that they have a fate bond with this baby and they need to bring her home and raise her in Griffin country. And from then you read on as this child, who is named Ines, is now 16, and she is tolerated by the Griffins, but she is still, of course, physically human. She does kind of act as a Griffin because that is the world that she knows. But the Griffins don't really accept her. She is mostly tolerated there, and something happens where she and her sister Tiruk get banished from Griffin country. As I said, this is a multiple POV story. There's also a character called Levin. She is a retired herald, which is kind of like a magically enhanced super soldier of the Empire. There is a character called Cillian, who is a forest ranger with Druid magic. And there is also a morally gray character called Kaito, who is an Imperial spy. These books are awesome, so unique, so fun to read, so interesting. I love the character dynamics. I love the found family trope. I always really like that, and in this book that was executed very well. I cannot recommend this duology enough. I think it would be great for anyone who already likes to read fantasy, but I also think that this would be good to maybe get into fantasy if you want to. So yeah, highly recommend. Next up, I reread one of my favorite books of all time, which is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I love this book so much that I also have a physical copy of it, and I don't really have that many physical copies of books, but this one is just amazing. I actually read this the first time not too long ago in 2025, and I felt like it was time for a reread. It's not a very long book too, and I won't say too much about it because I think the beauty of this book is also just kind of figuring out like what is going on because you will be as lost as the main character is at the start of the book. You really don't know much, and I think that that is the most fun way to enjoy this book. So what I will say is that it is about a man in his 30s called Piranesi, and Piranesi lives in what he calls a house, but it is more so an endless labyrinth of huge halls and vestibules that are connected to each other through doors and staircases. And all of these halls are filled with hundreds or sometimes even thousands of marble statues, all depicting different kinds of things. The house is not a very safe place to be in. You can definitely die there by drowning or from hunger or thirst. But Piranesi knows how to live there. He eats fish and seaweed. There are also birds that he connects with. And there is one other person also who lives in the house, and Piranesi calls him the Other, and they get together twice a week to discuss the house. The Other believes that the house harbors some kind of ancient secret for all of these magic powers that he really covets. And so he and Piranesi discuss the house often and, where they might find this secret. This book doesn't really fit in any one kind of genre. It is literary fiction, mystery, slight fantasy as well, but very much low fantasy with a soft magic system, and also some dark academia. So lots of stuff going on. It's about loneliness and finding a safe refuge from the harsh realities of the world, and how that can also be at the same time a sanctuary as well as a cage. It is just such an emotional book for me. I love this character so much. I have never felt as emotionally invested in any character, I don't think, as I do with Piranesi. It made me cry, it made me laugh. I just love this book so much, even on the second read, even when I did already know the things that you figure out the first time you read it. It's just an absolutely wonderful book, and I'm so floored by Susanna Clarke's genius. Also, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is a great book too. I read that last year. but Piranesi just very much close to my heart. If you haven't read this book yet, pick it up. Pick it up today. Next up, we have the only non-fiction book on this list, which is The Little Book of Ikigai by Ken Mogi. I made a full video about Ikigai on my main channel recently called Simple Happy Zen, so I will link that video down in the description box below for anyone who's interested. I used this book as research for that video. Ken Mogi is a Japanese neuroscientist who has written about Ikigai extensively, and this is his book about it. It is very different in many ways than the much more well-known bestseller book about Ikigai, the one with the 4 diagrams. Do what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. This is the concept of Ikigai that is most well known in the West. But Ken Mogi's view on Ikigai is very different and, as I understand it, much more representative of how actual Japanese people experience the concept of Ikigai. And that way of looking at Ikigai for me was much more interesting and much more usable in life. So if you are interested in the concept of Ikigai, I recommend first checking out my video about it, because that might already answer a few questions for you. And then if you want to learn more, then yes, I can also recommend the book from Ken Mogi. Next up, I reread another favorite book of mine that I also decided to purchase in physical copy, and that is Circe by Madeleine Miller. This is a Greek mythological retelling about the character of Circe, who also appears in the Odyssey. Circe is known as a witch on an island that turns Odysseus's men into pigs. And in this book, we explore her story from when she's born all the way, something I won't say. Circe lived a very difficult life among the gods. When she was a child, she was bullied, she was abused, she was ignored, and this led to her really craving some kind of love or connection with anyone. After a certain point, she does something that pisses off the wrong god, basically, and she gets banished to an island where no one else lives. That is her punishment, and she is to live there for all eternity. And on this island, basically, her real life starts, because that is when she starts to tap into her witchcraft. Circe is a lesser god, which means that she is the daughter of sun god Helios and a nymph. She is divine, she is immortal, so she is a god, but she doesn't have many special powers, and she also doesn't have a high status among the gods. But as a witch, Circe becomes more and more powerful, and for me, Circe is just such an inspirational character. The way that she steps into her power, she owns her power, she becomes such a strong and independent woman is incredibly inspiring to me. There is one line in the book when she first came to the island and the sun was going down, was starting to get dark. There were these woods on her island and she was afraid to step into them. And the line was, "I will not be like a bird bred in a cage, I thought, too dull to fly even when the door stands open. I stepped into those woods and my life began." Amazing. I love this book and I just really want to be a witch. Every time I read this book, I'm like, oh, I would really like to be a witch too, and like grow herbs and make potions and balms and like protection spells. And I think I would be really good at it too. So I just wish that this was actually like something that I could do, because I would definitely very much like to. But yeah, it's an amazing book. It's beautifully written too. The prose is outstanding, and I really liked The Song of Achilles by Madeleine Miller as well. Also an amazing book. But for me, Circe just has that something more, because I just love her character so much. Yes, I would recommend reading this book, if you couldn't tell. Next up, I read The Martian by Andy Weir. So after having read Project Hail Mary and watching the movie Project Hail Mary, I was excited to read a little bit more from Andy Weir. Even if I don't like his writing, I like his stories, and I was curious about The Martian. This book is about a guy who gets stranded on Mars. There was this mission with 6 astronauts, of which he was a part, and they went to Mars only supposed to be for a short mission. But there is a surprise storm that hits. During the evacuation, our main character, Mark, gets hit with debris and is presumed dead. So his other crewmates decide to evacuate the planet, thinking that he died and they cannot find him. but he in fact survived and he is now stranded there. He basically has two problems. One, he needs to survive somehow because there is very limited food, water, and even oxygen because his mission wasn't supposed to be very long. So he has to use science to somehow make more resources so he can survive there. And two, he needs to find a way to contact Earth and let them know that he is alive and figure out some kind of way to like get rescued or return back to Earth somehow. Basically, where Project Hail Mary was a book about one guy needing to save all of humanity, this book is all of humanity needing to save one guy. I had very similar thoughts that I have about Project Hail Mary also with The Martian. I did not like the writing, I did like the plot. So that is a personal preference thing. I also watched the movie The Martian, which I also really enjoyed. So I like Andy Weir's books, I like the science, I like the plot. I don't like his writing, that's my opinion, but I would still definitely recommend checking them out. They are very fun books to read and very interesting. With the sciencey stuff, yeah, definitely cool. Next up, I read another Keigo Higashino book called The Invisible Helix. This one I enjoyed a little bit less. Even though I finished it only like a month ago, I find it difficult to even like tell you what it's about exactly. Let's see if I can try. So this guy gets killed and his girlfriend is on the run. The police cannot find her. She's on the run with a family friend of hers. She was a friend of her mother who passed away a few years ago, and she immediately becomes a suspect, obviously, because she's on the run, but there seems to be more to the case. The police quickly figure out that the guy who was murdered was abusive of his girlfriend, and so there is abuse in this book, which was difficult to read at times. There's also another interesting character that seems to have something to do with this. She is the owner of a hostess bar. She used to be a hostess herself, and now she has this thriving business. And she kind of scouted the girlfriend a few months before because she felt like she had talent to become a hostess in her bar. So she kind of like seems to have something to do with her, but you don't really know why she would be that interested in the girl. This was the book that made me think like, okay, I think I've read enough Keigo Higashino for a while. Not that it's bad or anything, it's good and it's fun and it's interesting, but it doesn't really do much more for me than that. My personal favorite book of his is still The Devotion of Suspect X, and I personally have not found another book of his that I enjoy that much, so maybe start with that one. And then next up I read Sisters in Yellow by Mieko Kawakami. Mieko Kawakami is one of my favorite authors of all time, and she has done it again. I loved All the Lovers in the Night and I loved Breasts and Eggs. These are both two very, very good novels. I also really liked her short story, Miss Ice Sandwich. That was amazing too. She has another novel called Heaven. Heaven is supposed to be about bullying, if I understand correctly, and it's supposed to be pretty brutal. So I haven't worked up the courage to read that one yet. I don't know if I should, but when I learned that another book of hers was translated into English, Sisters in Yellow, I jumped on it. I bought the book not knowing anything about it. I didn't know what it was about, not a single thing. I didn't know how it was received. I only knew the title and the fact that it was written by Mieko Kawakami, and Sisters in Yellow might be my favorite book of hers. It's so good. The book starts with Hana, a 40-year-old woman, and she reads the news or hears the news on the TV or something that a woman is charged with the capture and abuse of a 20-year-old girl in her home. And this woman is called Kimiko, the 60-year-old woman who is suspected of this. And Hana is completely startled by this because she knows Kimiko from her own past. The book has two timelines. They have the current timeline of this happening, also under the backdrop of the start of COVID and people being quite scared, the streets becoming more and more empty, so it already gives it a very unsettling vibe because of that. And then also the timeline of Hana being a 15-year-old girl in 90s Tokyo, and that timeline takes up like 90% of the book. So you only have the current timeline at the start and at the end, but everything in between follows Hana from her age of 15 to her early 20s. When Hana grows up, her mother works in nightlife and she basically works all night and sleeps all day. She pays hardly any attention to Hana. She is a neglectful parent because of this, and Hana is forced to grow up rather quickly. Basically, all her mother does for her is put some money in a can that Hana can use to pay the bills and get groceries and everything, but that's basically where her care ends. And Hana meets Kimiko, a woman who is 20 years older and a friend of her mother's, and through events starts a bar with Kimiko called Lemon. At this time, Hana ran away from home. She runs the bar with Kimiko, but she is still underage. She dropped out of high school, and it is normal there to have a drink with your customers as the hostess of the bar. So Hana drinks a lot, and Kimiko too. This book is about the people who live kind of on the fringes of society, and that society also kind of forgets exist. They don't have ID, they don't have a high school diploma, they don't have a bank account. They keep their money in like a shoebox or a empty coffee tin or something like that. They don't have anything to fall back on except for the very small community that they build with people who are in a similar boat. And Kimiko is like that as well. She is a very interesting character. She's very mysterious, and Hana really trusts her because she's the only one who actually paid any sort of attention to her, make sure that she has enough to eat and things like that. The actions that they take to make enough money become more and more nefarious as the book goes on. They start to have links with the Yakuza, and it gets more and more into criminal territory. A major theme of this book is money and how it is linked to security, power, and especially the role of money in the lives of people who don't have any security and who don't have a lot of money. Another major theme in the book is the color yellow and the role that yellow has in feng shui. This is also the reason why they named their bar Lemon. She also meets two other teenage girls who are in sort of a similar situation as her, but slightly different. They become sort of friends. It's about sisterhood, and I don't want to say too much here because I don't want to spoil anything, but this is an amazing book. It is very much a slow burn. All of her books usually are. This one has a lot more plot to it than All the Lovers in the Night and Breast and Eggs, which are very much slice of life type books. This is a little bit of that as well, but there's more plot to it, more different characters, more things happening. I think I will make a more in-depth review about this book because there is so much more to talk about here. But for now, I'll stop. Of course, I do recommend this, and I think if you haven't read anything from Mieko Kawakami yet, then this might even be the book that I would recommend starting with. It's amazing. And that is it for all of the books that I have finished reading so far this year. At the moment, I'm currently reading two books, Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, which is also a reread, one of my favorite books. I also have this one in physical copy. And I'm also reading The Safekeep by Yael van de Woude, and so far I'm also really enjoying that one. Of course, I would love to know from you, have you read any of these books that I mentioned on the list or any of these authors? What did you think? Are there any books that I talked about that make you interested in reading them? And if so, which ones are they? And do you have any recommendations for me based on what I've talked about here? I would love to know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, I would love it if you could give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, maybe share or hype the video if you can, because this is a very new channel and all of these things will really help me to get it off the ground. I want to thank you for being here also, because this is one of my first videos still that I've published here, and so far I'm having such fun with this channel, and I'm very thankful for all of you who either came from my main channel, Simple Happy Zen, over here, or who maybe found this channel and don't know me yet. More book review videos coming up soon as well. Thank you for sticking around, and I hope you will have a wonderful day. Bye-bye. So I repotted my plants a couple months ago, and some of them were looking really sad, so I really didn't think that they would make it, but all of a sudden they are getting new leaves and they're all starting to really perk up, so I am hopeful that my plants are going to survive.